Hey, it's David here. If you're listening to this on the day of release or thereabouts, tomorrow is Thanksgiving here in the US. I'm grateful for you for being curious enough to keep exploring these tough topics with me. It means you haven't given up on understanding or on each other. And that's something worth celebrating this Thanksgiving. Okay, let's get on with the show. Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 77. If you're a longtime listener to Outrage Overload, this episode might come off a little different because we're going to just do a wing it opening here. We're here today talking with about a research paper that's called Solution Spillover, Pairing Issues with Ideological Solutions Fuels Polarization. And I've got two of the authors of that paper with me today. So we've got an exception there. I've got Adrienne Kafka and Troy Campbell. Can you each introduce yourselves, starting with Adrienne?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We're excited to chat about our paper. My name is Adrienne Kafka, and I'm currently a PhD student at Duke University in the Management and Organizations Department. And generally, my research is motivated by this broader question of why do we have so much trouble working collaboratively to solve the most pressing problems in society? And this question has led me to study topics related to polarization, disagreement, and identity and diversity more broadly across political, social, and organizational contexts.
Awesome. And Troy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Troy. I did my PhD at Duke in consumer psychology, and I worked with our co-author Erin Kay there back when I was a PhD. Today, I'm the principal at Hajduk House, where our slogan is Scientific Mind, Artistic Heart, and the chief scientist at On Your Feet, where our slogan is a collision of business, art, and science. And in both of these endeavors, as their slogans suggest, we take science, we combine it with artistic practices to help the biggest organizations and most important causes learn, make, and create amazing things.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, it's funny, like a lot of folks that knew me maybe in my college days or early in my career would be like, who stole David Beckmeyer and something? Because now because at that time I was an advocate of like just, oh, we can solve everything with science. We just do it with science, right? You know, now I'm here doing this show with social scientists and practitioners and psychologists and folks like that going, yeah, these are important. We should really spend energy on those, and maybe a lot more than we currently do. Well, that's great. So, you know, this paper introduces this idea, at least introduces it to me, of issue salience polarization, which is something I hadn't seen before. And you point out, you know, at the start of COVID, at the start of the pandemic, we were pretty evenly concerned about getting sick and various aspects of the pandemic. But it didn't take long before that unity kind of collapsed, and we had, you know, a partisan divide. And you know, that I think we can say was sort of created a lot by the proposed solutions to that situation. I think we've seen similar patterns with climate change or maybe even crime. So can you tell us a little bit, Adrienne, starting a little bit about what you found on this topic?
Yeah, I think that what you highlight with issue salience polarization is something that we think is one of really the coolest findings and major contributions of our paper, in that a lot of the work on polarization focuses on kind of other aspects of polarization, ideological polarization. A lot of work is about how our beliefs and values differ, or we disagree with others over specific topics. And affective polarization, there's a lot of work on that more recently, focuses on how we dislike and distrust members of the opposing political party. Whereas what we're really focusing on is these divisions or disagreement about whether an issue involves a serious or concerning issue and how much attention or priority this problem deserves.
Yeah. And so we'll get into the specifics of the sort of element of solution, which is really important to the process. But sort of the focus on this paper is something that we want to be more of a focus in general, which is on this idea of issue salience, which is this an important issue? Is this worth our time? Is this something we should be worried about? And in other words, it's where our attention should be. And so much of research that has been done in psychology doesn't really look at that as the dependent variable, even though that might be the most important variable in our times, right? So it's people, you'll be in a conversation sometimes with a person and you'll be talking about something. You'll be like, here's my thought about this issue. And then they'll be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But what I want to talk about is this. And they didn't deny that the thing you said exists. They weren't denying a fact, like all the denial of fact research that I and so many people did in the 2010s. They're just saying, here's where the attention should be. And it's that focus on issue salience, whether we're talking about it with politics or even inside organizations, right? In organizations, CEOs, they know there's so many different problems. And it's just what issue can they gain salience and momentum around? And so that is a fundamental thing that we just want to highlight as sort of we want more research on. And I think now we'll probably talk about the mechanisms, but issue salience is something that we would like to see more research done in the future on in general.
Yeah, and that's what we could say is sort of part of the novelty of this paper, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about the idea of solution aversion and solution attraction. So, I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward language, but the idea that we will downplay issues if we don't like the solutions, and we will sort of exaggerate them when we like the solutions, and why do you think it is so important to sort of talk about that?
Yeah, I think kind of building on what Troy was saying in terms of why it's important to be thinking about like issue salience itself and issue salience polarization is because there's such a competitive attention economy that we're seeing. And in terms of solution aversion and attraction, by simply throwing these solutions out there that could potentially solve problems, but potentially they're unrelated to the problem. I feel like we see a lot of solutions being thrown out today, especially by elected officials, that there's really no evidence that these solutions can solve these problems. But it really does direct what we're even thinking about. I think a lot of, especially younger people, tend to get a lot of their news about politics and public policy issues from social media too. So if you kind of like see these kind of flashy solutions, like, oh, more DEI needed here. Oh, cut back DEI here. These things that feel really ideologically charged and divisive. All of a sudden, you can bring so much attention to an issue or a problem, and you might think that it's so important and urgent to be solved. When in reality, it might all be this sense of urgency might really be being driven by the solution itself.
Yeah. So logically, how we feel about a problem or an issue should not be affected by what the solution should be, right? The importance of the issue, the problematicity of the problem should be at least somewhat disentangled, orthogonal, to use the science word, from the solutions. But what we find in what Adrienne K and I found in the original 2014 paper on solution aversion, and we expand in this paper, thank you, Adrienne, to have attraction and a larger story, is that the solutions that get proposed and paired with issues affect how people focus on those issues.
I think to your point earlier, David, you see in especially the political science public policy lit this concept of issue salience. But to our knowledge, there really hasn't been any focus or even discussion of issue salience as a polarizing mechanism, or what we're calling issue salience polarization. And it feels, if you just think about it, as the idea that if we can't even agree on what to talk about or what problems deserve our time and attention, then how are we even supposed to start talking about how to solve them? Because we don't even agree that we should be bringing them to the floor, basically.
Yeah, and I know that there's also been some research sort of suggesting that we all think we agree on what are the common sense problems that we have until we actually go start sharing them with each other. And then we find, oh, maybe we don't agree about that. And that kind of takes me to this idea of false polarization that's talked about. This and it reminded me of like some of the work with Jonathan Stray has talked about, that this polarization of false polarization of breadth kind of idea, that the division maybe we think we're divided over many things. And if I have that right, you can kind of correct me and frame this a little better than I am maybe. But this idea that we think we differ about we're divided about a lot of things, but it might come down to a smaller number of things, these kind of long running ideological solutions. And if that's true, maybe there's better hope. And people often talk about we're not as divided as we think we are. And I get feedback from real people, from listeners that say, I don't know, I went into this conversation, it seems like we're pretty divided, right? So I will sort of caution us to just say, oh, we're not as divided as we think we are, but we may have some basis for it here. And if that's true, maybe there's some hope for reconciliation, since maybe we can find that we don't disagree about as many things as we thought we did, and we can somehow maybe pull back a little bit. Would you agree with that, or have you thought about that?
I think you hit it really on the head. I think it's in my opinion, one of our most interesting findings, in that we not only feel like we disagree, but we really do. Like if we look at how false polarization is traditionally defined in the literature, it's overestimating our differences in beliefs, or overestimating the differences in beliefs between two groups on a topic in terms of extremity. Whereas here, we actually are finding these differences when these problems are paired with ideologically divisive solutions. But if you look at our control condition in each of our studies, where these problems are just presented by themselves without any ideologically charged solution, you're seeing that people are actually in pretty much agreement over how important the issue is, and it's not dependent on whether you're a liberal or conservative. But then when it's paired with the solution, it's not only that we feel like we disagree, we really do disagree on how important it is, but it's not necessarily driven by our values or beliefs about how important this problem is. It's actually being driven because this problem is just so tightly associated with one of a few long-standing supercharged ideological solutions that have kind of painted our view of how urgent that problem is, and could be associated with a solution, or even a political figure can also paint our view of how important that issue is. Troy, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, there are a lot of issues out there, and on maybe some time one, the different people aren't polarized onto them. They have a very similar neutral view on them. And then there are these supercharged ideological things that then become associated, paired solutions to problems and issues that are driving it. And so it allows you to see that on one hand, we're not as divided over all these kind of problems and issues. At time one, we feel very neutral about them. But once these things that we are really, really divided over enter the space, that division can come. And what that means and how you sort of assess whether that means we're divided or not is a difficult sort of meta assessment. But at a process level, that's what we are trying to offer with this paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. So I wanted, in study 4, I think it was, you show that self-interest can drive issue salience, and that was interesting to me. And maybe I'm reading too much into it. Yeah, so that was a study that was, non-political, we could say, about screen fatigue, and their salience of that issue was related to their earnings, right? Whether the solution, I should say, the solution effect, if the solution affected their earnings, then that would change the salience of the issue. You know, but with other domains like COVID, we don't see that, right? So we didn't see that. You'd think we would. You'd think there'd be a self-interest factor there, but we didn't really see that, I don't think. So is there other research suggesting self-interest maybe has only, certain domains that it appears in, maybe only economic contexts? Or do you have any other thoughts on how self-interest plays into this dynamic?
So I think it's important how we define self-interest in this situation, right? So in that study is a non-political context study that is sort of included in the paper to have a generalized test of the spillover solution phenomenon. And that's sort of the reason why that study is tacked on. It's a very scientific style, add an extra study to show mechanism outside of the confounds of a potential political situation. And I like it because also, so much of what I do is talk about solution, aversion, and attraction type stuff outside of this context. The question you had is, does your idea in COVID is that the self-interest wasn't a part of it, it was just ideology? And I would say that people's ideology becomes their self-interest. And that's the simple thing. And if we define self-interest in a rational way, we're imbuing an objective standpoint. But everybody's self-interest is a subjective way. And so subjectively, I feel as if this is what I want. And then also if I want, I'm going to change my views around reality a lot of times. So I'm not actually experiencing anything that suggests this isn't self-interest, right?
This reminds me of one social scientist who talked about how the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death.
Yes.
So, one thing in the paper, you spent a fair bit of time, distinguishing, and I think that study, adding that study to it is a big piece of it, sort of distinguishing solution spillover from partisan or source queuing. And in study 4, as you note, you sort of try to remove those cues altogether. But in my experience doing this show, I will say certainly, maybe not for that study because it was about screen fatigue. But I don't know. When I start thinking about things and cues in particular, it's pretty hard to remove cues altogether, right? I mean, in my experience, people are remarkably good at finding cues, even when they aren't even really there. I think with that study, you can be pretty confident. But how confident can we really be that an issue is ever free of cues? And how did you account for that, maybe in this work?
Yeah, I think to start, I think you're right that it's so hard to separate like political cues, which party supports the solution from the solution itself. And that was another main driver of why we added study 4, because even though in 2 of the first 3 studies, we don't mention which party officially the solution is coming from or supported by, you can pretty much infer based on the solutions that we chose, like a pro DEI solution is probably coming from Democrats or a liberal political figure, and vice versa for cutting solutions related to cutting DEI. And we think that these factors most likely and most definitely interact in the real world too. Most social psychological phenomena are multiply determined. A lot of things are contributing to them. So definitely, especially in politics, when solutions are proposed, who says the solution or what party it's coming from probably does have a lot of impact. But then what's really nice about this 4th study, where we do a totally non-politically charged situation with these online workers thinking about how important their screen fatigue is, and the solution in both cases, in one condition, they're told that researchers have proposed paid breaks for them to help with their screen fatigue. And in another condition, they're told researchers have proposed limiting the number of surveys they can take to help with this screen fatigue, which would inherently limit their earnings. So you're seeing this polarization effect emerge when the solution is coming from the same source. It's coming from researchers in both cases. And the only thing that's changing is literally the substance of the solution itself. So it helps us show that the substance of solutions really does matter in a controlled environment. But we definitely think that in the real world, lots of things are interacting with these solutions, source cues, partisan cues, you name it.
Yeah. And in a very sort of simple, straightforward truth about science, no study is a perfect study. You're just doing things that are better to get at what that journal's standard is for that. And, replication is important in conceptual, direct ways and all of that. And that's just a truth about the science that we do. It is definitely imperfect.
Right. So, based on that and knowing, and considering that, based on what we learned here, do you have practical steps for policymakers or communicators to reduce this spillover polarization?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll pass it off to you, Troy. I know we've talked about some ideas here, since I think it's really important. It's important to think about. We definitely, in this paper, focus on just investigating the truth about this reality that solutions spill over into views of problems. And so until we have a paper testing and exploring solutions, we can only speculate. But we do think that our findings, especially regarding the zero-sum belief mechanism, point to some potential fixes. With zero-sum belief specifically, if we propose solutions that are more inclusive to everyone's interests, it can maybe lessen these zero-sum assumptions. So instead of proposing something that feels immediately aligned with one political group or one group in an organization, propose solutions that, if you want people to care about and act on a problem, propose solutions that you think that people from multiple groups can rally around. And with that, you can propose multiple solutions. Usually the first solution proposed might not always be the best one. And if it has a zero-sum framing, it might make a whole group want to stop talking about the problem. So that could be another potential fix. Troy, I'm sure you have things to add here.
Yeah, so my sort of go-to is always to say this triple with activism of any sort, which is get local, get adjacent, temper your expectations. And so if you get local, oftentimes what you're able to find is that people have certain self-interests or microcultural ideologies that will overcome the sort of larger red, blue, similar stuff, right? The second is get adjacent. So get adjacent is the idea is I think every single time anybody talks about politics, they're like, how can I get? And then they describe the most extreme person they've ever met or the most extreme family member to change. That person is not adjacent. They're not close. I don't really like the term movable middle, but it's like that term, right? The person is the closest person who hasn't changed, which is why I like the adjacent rather than movable middle. And so you find those people, and our research suggests some of those will exist, which is the people who have less zero-sum beliefs. And so if you get backlash, there might be people that you actually are reaching just because those. And the other thing is just to sort of temper your expectations, which is sort of outside of this paper. It's just the general idea that change takes time and change takes relationship building and change takes so many different things. And I often say that what people really need to do is that they need to get like a micro PhD in a topic if they're trying to solve it. And to some degree, that's what your listeners are doing, right? They're listening to, 20 some episodes or more of you talking about one topic. And they're seeing that from all the different angles. So they know how to temper their expectations. They know different strategies and they know how to bring that all together.
Yeah, well, that's the plan anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked so much about those things, moving things local. I haven't really heard the adjacent term, but I really like that. Yeah, that's great advice, and it's so true. I mean, it's like everybody cares about the pothole down the street. Maybe start there.
Yeah. I think that another thing sort of in this space is that to realize there's different strategies for what you're trying to accomplish. So let's just take three different strategies. Strategy number one is you're trying to get somebody elected. Strategy number two is once they're elected, you're trying to pass a bill. And strategy number three is outside of the political engine, you're trying to get a group of people, like in an organization, to be more, let's say, inclusive. The strategies that you use in those situations and how much you need to worry about solution, attraction, and aversion, or how much you might actually want to use them, really changes. To win an election, lots of times you need 51% or less of the voter, and you need turnout, right? To pass a bill, you need all these other political things. It's so complicated. Us psychologists do not know those things. It is so different. I was at a talk one time, at a conference one time, and somebody gave a talk on that. And I'm like, I don't know how to do what you do, right? And then the third thing is, if I'm trying to win an election, I can just piss people off, right? That can actually be a good strategy to win an election, to alienate 49% of the population. Like, I would not recommend that most of the time, but it is an effective strategy sometimes, right? But if I am going into an organization and I'm trying to make everybody inclusive, I cannot alienate 49% of the people. And so it's a lot of different situations when you're getting into different spaces.
For sure. And when Adrienne was talking about some of those solutions, it sounded like the kind of deliberation that our founders were sort of telling us to do. We just need to get back to that instead of the alienating 49%. Kind of move in that direction. We've mentioned it a couple of times, and you flagged solution attraction as an underexplored mechanism. And maybe linked to some other things, maybe conspiracy theories, exaggerated threats. So what's the next big question you're looking to investigate?
It's a big question. I think solution attraction's a great area for future research. I have a few things starting up right now, but one broad idea that I'm interested in and feel it could be pretty important is this idea of denial of complexity, and specifically motivated denial of complexity. And basically this idea that when people are thinking about issues, even if these issues are multifaceted and have a lot of different dimensions, we often tend to think about them as one-dimensional, which kind of ties into this idea of zero sum. Like, there's a simple good, bad, right, wrong in this issue. And I'm kind of curious how this denial of complexity of issues manifests in attitudes and behaviors and consequences, potentially related to polarization as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you think about it, there is, if you just think both of the sides is occurring, there is a certain man that exists in the United States of America right now. And some of the people have reduced the complexity of this man will solve all the problems. Other people have reduced the complexity to this man is all the problems, right? So that reduction of that reduction of complexity really exists across the human experience, at least in the United States of America. And that, I think, is going to be a really cool direction if Adrienne and her colleagues can really, surface that as a concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I know we've had James Fishkin on, who does like the deliberative polling stuff, and his work has shown that if you can express or get people to see that nuance, that can make a difference. And Nick Stegnero also has some research like that too. So that's something we're trying to do with this show, is maybe show that there's more nuance to most of these ideas that we have and most of the problems that we have.
Yeah. And when there's more nuance, that means that you as an individual or your small group can grab a place and make a difference, right? As a person, both of us are from a business school, and lots of times I like to kind of joshingly say people should think about politics and activism more like business, right? When a new business comes up, a new activism movement comes up, it's not trying to get the entire market share of the world or a country or a state. It's being like, where is an underserved part, or where is a part where they're not being served well, and we can penetrate that market with a better product or a better story or a better service. And that's sort of what activists can do the same way, which is being like, where can we make a dent that we can cause a localized, sustainable change, right? Instead of trying to, rule the world from your couch, try to change something that's outside your doorstep, and you can.
That's great advice. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Adrienne Kafka and Troy Campbell, thanks so much for making time for our program and providing those insights.
Awesome. Thank you, David, for this wonderful podcast series where you're helping people see nuance.
Thank you. That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If something in this episode sparked a thought, or maybe even lit a fire, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a voice message or even schedule a quick one-on-one chat right from our contact page at outrageoverload.net/contact. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.